Welcome to today's Terraform Learning. Today we're going to be covering Terraform providers. Before we dive into the page that I have open here, I'm going to give you a brief description of what a provider is. A Terraform provider is a collection of resources and data lookups that make up a library of resources related to a specific service. So, for example, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Kubernetes, these are probably the four biggest providers that are out there in the HashiCorp registry. There are sort of three different tiers of providers. There are the official providers, which are officially maintained by HashiCorp, the company. There are also partner providers. Partner providers are they're like more official than community, but they are not maintained directly by HashiCorp. Some examples of this would be things like the Oracle Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, and then this list of things that you see here. There are a lot of really big tools that sort of have big support. Splunk, JFrog, Microsoft has some out here. These are basically like big companies that provide and maintain their own provider resource library. And then you have community, which is like people like you and me. We can write our own providers to basically wrap some functionality that we want Terraform to manage in its state. So these are all just public libraries. Sometimes when you are using a really obscure tool, like example, Snowflake is like they're a partner, but for a long time there was sort of like third-party integrations that you could do with it for things that were not supported out of the box by the Snowflake provider itself. So that's an example. There are lots of community providers. I honestly recommend that you don't leverage community providers if you can help it. In most cases, you want to stick with the official or the partner tier providers. That's going to get you a majority of your functionality of integration that you want to work with in an enterprise space. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you. So you've seen an example. This example in earlier videos of me setting up sort of just a dummy little project where I just kind of create a random integer and I output some details. What I want to do is actually open up one of the providers that I reference here. So in this project, I use the local provider and the random provider. And so what I want to do is actually open those up and show you what it looks like. So this is an official provider provided by HashiCorp, the random provider. And usually when you click into a provider page, there'll sort of be an overview or documentation related to it. It'll have a link to where the source code for the provider is housed. A lot of them are sort of open source in the sense that you can submit merge requests, you can open issues against them. Even though they're directly maintained by the vendor, the source code is sort of publicly accessible. And then there's documentation. On the first page of pretty much every provider, there'll sort of be a description of how to leverage that provider. The more official the provider, the more formal this documentation is going to be. And to leverage the provider, you usually click this little use provider box and it'll give you the snippet that you want when you want to leverage the latest, whatever the latest version of the provider is. In the case of this provider, 3.5.1 is the latest version, which was published 7 months ago. So when you click use provider, it renders the details for the latest version specifically. Sometimes providers will have configuration options that go with them. Other times they won't. Random's pretty vanilla. There's not a whole lot of configuration you need to do to actually leverage the provider. The purpose of it is to deal with random values, create random values, things like IDs, names, hashes, etc. What you'll see a lot of times is you'll see a resources block and a data block. Random actually doesn't have any data. Resources, real briefly, are things that you want Terraform to maintain inside of the state. So they're things that your particular Terraform project manages. Data are things that you want to reference inside of your stack, but you don't want to be responsible for maintaining the existence of that data. You're just referencing it as a lookup. The random provider has a couple different resources that are available to you, and they're pretty self-explanatory. The first one is ID, generates a random number that are unique identifiers. There will be some form of input that is required. There are some optional things that you can provide, and then there are sort of read-only output things that will be usable when the resource creates itself. The next one is an integer, so this is a random number. You can generate a random password. You can generate a random pet name. You can generate a random shuffle where you provide a list of input and how many you want back, and it will provide that. And you will also be able to generate random strings and UUIDs. So this is the library that the random provider offers out of the box. Very, very useful. Every single provider will have its own library of things, and some are going to be more complex than others. AWS is going to be extremely complex in that there are hundreds and hundreds of resources. It basically touches every single service that exists inside of the AWS landscape. And inside of there, you'll have resources and data sources for those various subcomponents of it. This is a very big, complex library. So that is a little overview of providers. Thank you very much for tuning in. We ask that if you appreciate this video, that you would like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.